Hello and welcome to Trees, the Silent Sentinals. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm glad that you have opted to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest as we go in search of trees all around our beautiful island. In last week's program, we focused on the beautiful decorative African tulip tree and a number of other interesting trees around our island. In this week's program, we shall call attention to the Ligum vitae, the pride of Barbados, and the beautiful evergreen tree. The discussion begins just about 2.5 miles from here on the compound of the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Conference Centre on 2 Mile Hill, where a Ligum vitae tree is to be found. It is sometimes referred to as the wood of life or iron wood. Now, on our island's treescape, it might not appear to be anything remarkable simply because it grows slowly. But it is one of the most impressive trees that have come out of the Caribbean, and its properties have been used in remarkable ways. Dr. Lennox Honeychurch begins the discussion on the compound of the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Conference Centre, where one such tree is found.
Its name is Lignum vitae, in Latin, wood of life. And this is because it lasts so long. It lives almost even in its dead state after it has been cut down and has been used in other means. It lasts, as they would consume, forever. And so we have this wood which is used in a wide variety of things where you need longevity. The indigenous people of the Greater Antilles, from where this tree came, those Greater Antillean islands of Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba, this is where this tree was best known and first sighted by European explorers.
Of course, before being sighted by the Europeans, it was well known to the Amerindian people, who made very good use of its wood.
It was known to the indigenous people as guayacan, and in fact that is part of its scientific name, Guayacanium. But the guayacan for the Taino people were one of the most important components of not only their spiritual life, but their utilitarian life, because it was so hard. They used the wood to carve their religious zimis. And it is amazing and just shows the longevity of this wood, because those zimis are still found today and have been found over the last 100, 200, 300 years of colonization in caves in Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola and Cuba. And these objects have been able to survive because of the particular character of the Lignum vitae. It is an endangered wood. It is protected by CITES. It is not a wood that can be readily cut without permission. And in fact, it is preserved under law in many countries.
It's also the world's densest wood and has such unusual properties that, surprisingly to all, it has been used in amazing ways.
The wood itself is so hard, so heavy, that it actually can sink. It does not float. And for that reason, it is used in a lot of maritime things. For instance, the block and tackle of ships, some of the parts of the machinery of ships in the past, until synthetic materials were developed, these pieces of wood were used.
It was also used in the world's first nuclear-powered machine. We also cannot forget how good use was made of it in the game of cricket.
In the game of cricket, we find that the bails that rested on the stumps in a game of cricket were made of Lignum vitae, and they were favored because of the extreme weight, so that you really would have to bowl out and hit those stumps to be able to show that you had got the batsman out. But also, of course, it was for the wind. In extreme conditions, those bails would remain on the stumps because of the weight of the Lignum vitae.
What about household items? How have homemakers benefited from the wood of this tree over the years? Are there any utensils made from it?
Also for mortar and pestles, those kinds of things that needed a great deal of strength because of the mortar and pestle and the activity, the hitting of the one piece of wood against the other. And so you find then mortar and pestles for the crushing of spice and other foodstuffs. The lignum vitae was used. In Britain, for over 100 years, the police truncheons for chasing criminals and hitting them on the head were made of lignum vitae because of the strength of the wood, but also the fact that because of its particular oily nature, it would not necessarily blister or cut the skin. So you could, with a reasonable blow, you could actually apprehend your criminal without actually injuring them to a great extent. Also in the game of croquet, where you needed heavy-duty wood, both for the mallet and for the balls in a croquet game, lignum vitae was used.
The wood produce an oil that is an added special quality which makes the wood so unique.
The natural oils within the lignum vitae created this important lubricant, and the oil itself also helped to preserve the wood, and that is why you find it had this longevity as well. There is an important link between lignum vitae, Barbados, and the invention of longitude. And we are going to talk about this on the site where this link occurred, here in Barbados, in Bridgetown, when lignum vitae was used in a very important technical component for the discovery of something which was going to revolutionize our concept, our understanding of the planet on which we live. So here we come to the mouth of the careenage and the pierhead at Bridgetown to find a spot associated with the history of navigation, with shipping and trade around the world that is linked to this spot here in Barbados and to pieces of wood of the lignum vitae. John Harrison was a watchmaker in England who responded to an advertisement to get a particular system whereby sailors could register longitude. Now, up until that time in the 18th century, everybody who was sailing followed latitude, the lines, the imaginary lines around the globe. But one thing they could not do, except on a piece of paper in a room in a stable building, was to work out longitude. And if they could work out both latitude and longitude on their ships, they would then be able to much more easily chart their way around the world. But one of the things that you needed was a clock, and a clock that could balance and continue to work on a moving, rocking sailing ship. And so John Harrison responded, and he created a number of clocks and experimented with them. And one of the things that he used, because of the quality of the wood, were lignum vitae, pieces of lignum vitae wood for the axles and the cogs, and parts of the operation material that was not brass was linked by lignum vitae because of the quality of the natural oils within the wood, that he would not continuously have to be putting oil in place, that the natural oil would exude from the wood and maintain the clock working. And so, back in 1764, he left Britain on a ship in March, and he arrived right here off the careenage, landing here on the pierhead with his clock, and he proved that it was possible to have one of these clocks. And thanks to this link with Barbados, this trip across the Atlantic, the use of the lignum vitae wood here, right here on the pierhead in what was earlier called Fort Willoughby at the careenage in Barbados, it was successfully shown that you could have one of these clocks to operate and to create on every ship that sailed around the world an understanding and a definition and a marking of longitude.
The story is of great significance on two fronts. Of interest to this program is the use of the lignum vitae wood. The greater interest, of course, is the fact that it was right here in Barbados where the veracity of the chronometer was tested, something which we shared with you in another series, Walking Tours of Historic Bridgetown. Even though it is known as the Tree of Life, folklore has it that this tree has also been associated with death. Senator Professor Sir Henry Fraser shares a tale from his garden where a lignum vitae tree is found.
I have the lignum vitae, the wonderful lignum vitae, the tree of life over here. And lignum vitae was banned in Barbados for many, many decades because of the belief that lignum vitae produced abortions. And when I moved into this house, the 75-year-old gardener who came to the house a couple of times, and I met him, and he talked about the lignum vitae, and he said to me, Dr. Fraser, you know about the lignum vitae? And I said, what? And he said, you know it could cause abortions. Well, I knew the story, but he said, you know, when I was a boy, if anybody was caught by the police with a lignum vitae twig, they would be taken straight to the bridge station or central station, because it was assumed that they were taking it to produce an abortion. You see? Well, in fact, what lignum vitae tea does is to produce a hemorrhagic cystitis. It makes you bleed from your bladder. That is one of the things. And the famous Dr. Harry Bailey, my medical hero, Dr. Harry Bailey, had a friend called Vickers Earle who wrote a paper when he was working in one tropical country. He wrote a paper about the hemorrhagic cystitis of the lignum vitae. I do not know the facts about it producing abortions, and I am not about to suggest that this is something that we should be looking at this time. But you know, there are people who believe that there are thousands of remedies and there are also thousands of poisons around us. And certainly in the ancient days of folk medicine, everything was tried.
Unfortunately, lignum vitae has been exploited to the brink of extinction and is now an endangered species. From the lignum vitae tree, the tree of life, we turn our attention to a special plant that must be included in this program.
It is fitting that in this year of the 50th anniversary of the independence of Barbados, that we look at the pride of Barbados, the plant that is known around the world by this name and is associated with Barbados. The origin of the plant was in Africa, in the areas of Oyo, that is southwestern Nigeria, and into Togo. But they came to Barbados via the Cape Verde Islands off the west coast of Africa. Like so much else, when we study the botany and in fact some of the wildlife of Barbados, we understand deeper links with Africa, particularly the areas around West Africa from where the ships came carrying the enslaved. There was quite a marketplace occurring on this coast, and not only in question of slaves and the trading of produce from Britain in the Industrial Revolution across to the African traders, but also within those marketplaces, things like yams and other plants, sorghum, that were used here. And in fact, things that were just for beautification reason, plants like the pride of Barbados. And so the name, although we have the common name being the pride of Barbados, and it's known by other names in other parts of the world, its scientific name is Cisalpina pulcherrima. And that first part of the name comes from Italian botanist and philosopher Andrea Cesalpino. Now, Cesalpino lived between 1519 and 1603, but in Italy he studied plants that were being brought from Africa along the coast of West Africa, and by that time around into the Indian Ocean and across onto the Indian subcontinent. And one of the plants that he studied was this one, which became pride of Barbados, but was also associated up to today scientifically with his name.
The pride of Barbados is seen as a decorative plant on our island. However, in other places, properties of this plant are utilized.
It is a legume, that is, it's a member of the pea family. And in Mexico, the young pods, the very young pods, are boiled and together they are used as a vegetable. But you have to be very careful because the older the seeds become, they become poisonous. and therefore they are not used. One of the links that we have here with Africa is that it was transported across, and the people who came with it, the enslaved, they understood and knew of its naming and also its uses. And the African name for this plant is ayuwiri. Ayuwiri. And this was discovered by interviewing Maroons, that is slaves who had escaped from the plantations in Suriname and who had gone up into the forest, and they recalled the West African name for this, which we know today as the Pride of Barbados. The Saramacca Maroons in Suriname still use it for medicinal purposes. In fact, the roots, rather dangerously, in small amounts, were used for abortions. Now remember, there are many medicinal uses for plants, and not all of them are really ones that one would want to encourage. But we're just recording this for posterity, for understanding the links in the background of it. Now, the Pride of Barbados is the national flower of Barbados. It is on the coat of arms of Barbados, prominently displayed on the coat of arms with another plant, another tree in the center, that is the bearded fig tree, closely associated with the name of Barbados. But the Pride of Barbados also occurs on Her Majesty the Queen's personal Barbadian flag. Now let us understand, the Queen Elizabeth II, Elizabeth Windsor if you will, is independently the Queen of Barbados. If she is kicked out of the United Kingdom, she still has 15 other monarchies to go to, and one of them is Barbados. And therefore, she has her own flag with two of the flowers of the Pride of Barbados on either side, and her crest and the bearded fig tree in the center on a yellow background. So we have to remember that besides our coat of arms, and besides the fact that it's the national flower, it is also on the Queen's personal flag. And we see that it has both yellow and orange, dark red varieties. And over the years, particularly in the southern USA, where it is very popular in places like Texas and Florida, it has been hybridized, propagated, and a variety of colors have been developed over the years. But here in Barbados, it was first recorded in Barbados in 1657. And so we know that from Barbados, it was then dispersed across the Caribbean and into the southern part of America and into the Central American region and South America. And that is why, because of its origin in the New World from Barbados, its dispersal from Barbados, it has this name, the Pride of Barbados. And so here's this link, a wonderful plant, beautiful borders all around the gardens of Barbados, but associated not only with our independence, our nationalism, our island, but also with Africa, one of these important links that is actually registered within the botany of our island.
Our final tree on this program, like so many others, has a special place in the heart of Barbadians, for it was under this tree that many social activities were held on the island.
Ficus benjamina, known in Barbados as the evergreen. Now, evergreen is a term that in other countries would have a different connotation, particularly in temperate countries, where evergreen is associated with pines that remain green throughout the winter. Here, of course, we have no winter, but we do have deciduous tropical trees that shed their leaves from time to time. The thing about the evergreen, it remains green in spite of the fact that here and there the leaves are constantly shedding. But it gives the impression of being green throughout particularly the dry season. And the Ficus benjamina actually originates from the Far East, from Asia. However, figs, as we know from the bearded fig tree, the Ficus of Barbados, is found around the tropical world. So this fig here, brought to Barbados from Asia and usually via Africa, has become a standard plant in Barbados. It's a stately tree and it is used mainly in parks and public places. Here in Barbados, traditionally, it has been used in the center of plantation yards or in town squares, such as the Lower Green in Bridgetown. It's also a favorite place in the past for marketplaces. Just like the tamarind, the sandbox, so too the Ficus benjamina, the evergreen tree, was used to shade market vendors, barbers in the days that people cut their hair out in the open. Any area in a public place where people would congregate under the shade was usually covered and shaded by an evergreen tree.
This tree has become a special part of the history and heritage of Barbados. But like our bearded fig tree, which is on the coat of arms, the evergreen tree is the national tree of another nation.
The tree is the official tree of Bangkok in Thailand, and it is found widely, as you would imagine, throughout the countries in the Far East, as a shade tree, as decorative hedges, trimmed, and in fact they are better trimmed. You have a root system just as wide as you have your crown of the tree, moving across through the soil at very shallow level. There are many varieties, and particularly what we find are, in the last 20-30 years, a number of hybrid varieties with multicolored, different shaded leaves, for instance. White and green and pale green have been developed, and they are particularly popular for decorating offices and homes, particularly since they can be trimmed and they can be had in miniature pots. They're very good in places like North America and Europe, where the buildings are closed up for much of the year, in circulating oxygen and freshening up the rooms. So it does have a great benefit around other parts besides the tropics.
In a previous program, Dr. John Webster looked at trees as silent sentinels for birds. As you will now learn, one such tree is the evergreen.
It is also a favorite place for birds, and we find a number of bird species within this, particularly when it is fruiting. The very small orange fruit, very popular with birds, like all figs. And so particularly here in Barbados, we find it is frequented by the grackle, the one that we call the blackbird, and also the ramier, the pigeon I should say. Doves and pigeons particularly like this tree. We see the aerial roots, similar to the bearded fig tree, as all ficus do have.
What about the growth of the evergreen tree? Does it easily grow and provide a wide canopy? From the home of his art, Dr. Honeychurch demonstrates the rapidity of its growth.
Like all ficus trees, the Ficus benjamina, or the evergreen tree, grows very fast indeed. And sometimes we see these huge trees and we think they are hundreds of years old. But in this case, we actually have a date. This tree was planted by Frank Collymore, the Barbadian writer and actor and promoter of literature. And he loved trees. And there was a tree here before in his yard at Woodville, Chelsea Road, which was blown down by Hurricane Janet in 1955. And he promptly planted this evergreen in 1955. And so we know that this tree here, that looks hundreds of years old, is actually only 60 years old. So it shows the speed with which the evergreen grows, and that if untended and uncut, the spread of the canopy of branches and the extent of the tree and its roots. A fine example of the evergreen tree, one of the iconic trees of Barbados. But all in all, a tree that keeps the place cool, great for shade in public places, and one that is very much associated with the social life of Barbados.
In that regard, it ranks with many other trees that have played a similar role in the lives of many Barbadians over the years. In a sense, they stand so quietly as silent sentinels and play their part without intruding in our affairs that we so very often forget the importance of their existence in our lives and the environment. the Lignum Vitae, the pride of Barbados and the evergreen. That will do it for this week. Until next week at the same time, I'm Sherwood McCaskey, and I'm gone in search of more trees.